I'm saying, yes, a lot was written. This is what actually happened. This is how I saw it. These are the facts. These are the scenes. These are the emotional dramas. These are the complications caused. These are the upheavals. This is why we separated. Judge for yourself. It's all there. If you're interested in film history, Parveen Babi, Kabir Bedi, and their relationship, read about it, decide for yourself. I'm not going to say anything more than I've said. I've told my story. Now you decide.
Hey guys, welcome to Bollywood Life. I'm Hitesh Malik और आज मेरे सामने है एक living legend, Mr. Kabir Bedi. Kabir sir, welcome to the portal. I'm extremely honored to interview you finally for your book.
Thank you so much, Hitesh. Lovely to be talking to you, and I look forward to a lovely conversation.
First of all, congratulations, sir, for the overwhelming response you're getting for your book. I must say it's an incredible treasure for all of us, for sure. So I would start my interview with my question that how challenging was it for you to write everything in extreme detail?
Hitesh, I needed to tell my story as interestingly as I could, as honestly as I could, with my own fallibilities. And that's the only way I could talk about everything that happened to me and share all the extraordinary happenings of my life. It's been a life of extreme highs and lows, all the thrills and chills of a roller coaster. And I really felt I had to tell my story because I knew I had a good story. So once I decided to tell my story, I said, I'm going to tell it as honestly as I can. This is my truth. It is my story. And I think it's important for people to know what a life I have led and what it means to lead the life of an actor, not just in Bollywood, but also in Europe, also in Hollywood. What are the challenges of success? What are the lessons of failure? What are the joys of love? And what is the sorrow of losing love? All these things that themes I've explored in my book, what it is to be human.
Did you question yourself that you should include some part or not? Or did you question like you were getting so much into detail, you should stop, or you would be like, no, I need to flow it all?
No filters, no filters. जैसे था वैसे मैंने लिखा, जो मेरा सच था वो मैंने कहा. अगर मैंने दूसरों की अच्छाइयों की बात की है, अपनी अच्छाइयों की बात की है. जहां दूसरों की बुराइयां की है, अपनी भी बुराइयां की है. और बुराइयां also not in any malice, not in a vindictive way. We were all young, we were all going through life. People make mistakes. But I can only talk of mistakes of others if I talk about my own mistakes. So this is that thing कि कहानी मैंने अपने दिल की गहराइयों की बात की, इसमें दिल की गहराइयों की बात की है. कहानियां रिश्तों की है, चिंताओं की है, गजब की सफलताओं की है, सफलताएं भी, उसमें गलतियां भी, अंतर्राष्ट्रीय जीतें भी जिन्होंने भारत को गौरवान्वित किया, दिल दुखाने वाली ट्रेजेडीज भी. All these things are part of my journey, and I didn't want any filters. What I did want, the only filters I had was that I didn't want any unnecessary information to come into the telling of each story as I told it. नहीं तो बात बहुत बोरिंग बन जाती है, एनसाइक्लोपीडिया ब्रिटानिका बन जाती है. मेरा ये दोस्त था, मेरे चाचे ने वो किया, अंकल ने वो किया, उस फैमिली में ये हुआ. ये सब बातें फजूल हैं. कहानी जो मैं कहना चाहता हूँ, और मैंने अपनी किताब कई कहानियों में लिखी है, हर कहानी की अपनी लॉजिक है, अपनी टेंशन है, अपना बिगिनिंग मिडिल एंड एंड है, and I stuck to that. So the only filters I had was to filter out unnecessary information. Just stick to the basic baat, कहानी क्या है.
जी. Sir, what was the most emotional chapter of your life that you found it a bit difficult to write than other chapters?
There are many difficult chapters. The chapters in my relationships were difficult because they were also very painful, and they were joyful, and they were everything it takes to be in love and to fall out of love and everything else. But of course, the most difficult chapter has to be the chapter on my son and the problems he faced. What it takes for a father to face a tragedy in a son who is developing a mental problem at a time when he is poised for the greatest success in the internet age, in the greatest career he could have had. All those things are things that I've shared with great difficulty because I had to reopen those wounds. I had to come to terms with them. But I had to go back in there and talk about it. And I've talked about it vividly, almost scene by scene. And that makes it a very compelling and very moving piece of writing. But God, it was difficult to write, yes. Because at times I broke down. I mean, I was reliving the most painful part of my life.
Kudos to you, sir. Thank you so much for writing that out, and it's surely enlightening for everyone out there. I'm so sure about that. With that, sir, you have done films in so many languages. You have done films in so many regions. So, while as an actor, when did you learn most about acting?
You know, acting was always a hobby of mine. I won the Kendall Cup for acting in Sherwood. I was the secretary of the Shakespeare Society at St. Stephen's College in Delhi. I took part in inter-college plays. Then when I came to Bombay, my greatest good fortune when I joined advertising was that Alec Padamsee was my boss. And he cast me in Tughlaq and Girish Karnad's first big play. And the success of that play also taught me a lot. Working with Alec Padamsee probably taught me the most about acting. And then when I went on to act in Europe, etc., you learn all the time. It's not as though you stop learning. Every film is a learning experience. Every role is a learning experience. But one of the reasons I want to write this book is that nobody knows my whole story. Nobody's seen all my films. Bollywood people have seen my Bollywood films. Europe has seen my European films. Americans have seen my American series. Around the world, they may have seen me in The Bold and Beautiful or the James Bond film playing the villain. Nobody's seen all this. And I tell you, what really tests you as an actor the most is when you do a daily serial like The Bold and the Beautiful. Because you're working 12 to 14 hours a day. And if you forget your lines, then and the program gets delayed beyond 6 o'clock in the evening, the whole building goes into overtime and they write you out. So your survival is at stake every day that you don't delay them.
Even if you're like a big star, even that threat is still there. Wow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's not a question of how big a star you are, it's a question of economics. They have to turn out half an hour completed every day, right? Half an hour completed every day means that they give you a basic blocking in the morning. After you finish your makeup and early lunch, you're on. And they shoot with 5 cameras, almost like a play without a rehearsal.
Oh my
scene
God.
By scene. Each scene is like doing a play. And while you're shooting, they're editing. So as you're acting, there's these 5 cameras on you. They're saying cut to camera 1, cut to camera 3, cut to camera 2. They're editing. God. So if you forget your lines and you fumble and you create a problem, they have to go back to the beginning of the scene and start again. That costs them a lot of time and money. And if your delays, your forgetting your lines, take you over 6 o'clock, it's not just every actor on the set goes into overtime. The whole crew goes into overtime. The whole building goes into overtime because the editors are up there, the producers are up. Everyone gets overtime. So every minute of that time is costing you so much that you delay them for half an hour on one day. They might forgive you once. You do it 2 or 3 times, they will write out your character. They cannot afford to have you, no matter how big a star you are. So that is the hardest form of acting. And you learn that you bloody well know your lines. And coming into a show when everybody's developed almost photographic memories, after a 12, 14-hour working day, you go back home. I was up till 2 in the morning learning my lines, terrified that if I forgot my lines or forgot my movements or caused them delays, I would be written out of the show. And I survived on that show for almost a year, so I must have done something right.
Definitely. Okay, sir, you have mentioned that interview with Beatles was the turning point of your career. So,
Yeah.
if I have to ask you, what's the most vulnerable moment of your career or your life? What would you say to me?
You're right. I mean, the Beatles interview was certainly a turning point, because how I got that interview was another story in itself. What happened in the interview is a separate story. What happened after that and the dramas that followed after the interview, all that's in my book. I was probably at a very vulnerable stage when I decided to leave Delhi, because you're leaving the security of everything and leaving for Bombay with 700 rupees in your pocket. That's a very vulnerable moment. Another big vulnerable moment was when I was in advertising and I decided to come into Bollywood. Leaving the security of advertising, all my contemporaries became the biggest heads of advertising agencies: Ranjan Kapoor, Suresh Malik, Frank Simoes, Justin Dakuna, Alec Padamsi, all became heads of advertising agencies. So leaving that security and that career path to great glory in advertising for the untested waters of Bollywood was also a moment of great vulnerability. Taking a risk and going to Hollywood after the success of Europe, where I became a huge star, was again a very vulnerable point, because you want to push the boundaries, you want to do what every actor does, which is go to Hollywood and make a big splash there. But when you enter Hollywood and find no roles are being written for you, and you're facing defeat, how do you overcome that? Because that again is a great point of vulnerability.
True.
And I think other points, because my life, I can talk about 10 points of vulnerability, is like a roller coaster. Great highs, great lows, great joys, great sorrows. That's why I say I've lived a thrilling life, and reading my book is a thrilling adventure. So even in Hollywood, because of my bad investments, I faced some very bad financial days. That was a great point of vulnerability. How do you rise from setbacks like that? How do you rebuild your life? Because there are obligations, there are alimonies, there are children to educate, there are lives to be lived. How do you deal with all that? So lots of vulnerabilities, and yet mind-blowing success as well. So I've seen it all.
All worth it, I must say then.
Thank you so much.
Okay, sir, in an interview, you just mentioned that there have been so many chapters of your life that are not in the book because you couldn't write all, and it would require another sequel for you to write about those chapters. So if you plan to write a sequel, what all would be the chapters that we can, have a look at, and what we can expect if that thing happens?
Hitesh, if enough people read my book, and I sometimes wonder if people are reading books anymore, because I saw this wonderful cartoon the other day of a guy, a young guy, looking at a book, and this girl asks him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm reading a book to see if I can still do it."
Oh my God.
So it's like, with all the distractions of social media and OTT and everything else.
Agreed.
But a book is a whole different experience. The conversation that you have with the mind, the experiences that you are able to internalize in a book are something that no film, no theater, no social media can give you. It's really exploring worlds of another person. True. And relating them to yours.
True.
So if I've succeeded in doing that, and if enough people take the trouble to read my book and share and learn what I have shared with them, then certainly I will write another book. What I had to do in this book, because there's a series of stories and I've explored them with great emotional depth, etc. When I came to the end, I had a choice. Either I expand my book and make it a 500-page book, or I just come to the end and tell the end in the most interesting way I can without getting into all the emotional dramas of the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. So I've sort of talked about the dramas, but I haven't shown them with the same kind of emotional detail as I have in the earlier chapters. Because I felt by then people had so much emotional experience. So they've gone through so much with me that by now they probably say, "Ab kahani ki ka climax kya, yehi bata do," you know? And that's what I did. Maybe if there's another book, I could expand that chapter as one of my chapters and explore what happened in that. And there are many other stories of my Hollywood years which I haven't been able to include because in writing my stories, I made sure that I didn't clutter them with unnecessary detail. People need to know what's the story, man. Tell us the story. Don't get into all the side avenues and side streets. Get on with what happens next. And that's what I did in my book. That's why people call it unputdownable. They want to know what's happening in the next line, the next paragraph, the next page, the next chapter. And so many people said, like the last person I spoke to, they said, "I'm a lazy reader. I read books, and if they don't interest me, I drop them." He said, "Your book I couldn't put down." That a lot of people have said because perhaps coming from theatre, coming from film, understanding what dramatic tension is about, I've written it in a way that really, if you start reading it, I promise you will not be able to stop. Because it's written like that. You want to know what happens next. And there's a lot of drama in that book. So hopefully there will be another, if enough people reward me by reading what I've written in this one.
So, sir, which chapters do we see more in the more enhancement of what chapters will we see in the book if you write another book?
Probably more about the Hollywood years. More about the dramas of the last 20 years. But there's more than enough in that story. I've told my story, my basic story, the essence of my story I've told. And I've told it in great depth and with emotional resonance. So many scenes are almost cinematic. You feel like you're there in the room with me as I'm going through all these dramas. And that's the intention. So let's not worry about the future. Let's worry about how I can persuade you and many of your generation to read my book, because my book is dedicated to your generation, as you saw, dedicated to all young professionals like my son Siddharth. Because there are stories that, not just my story, what's it like to live in the 60s? What's it like to grow up with that social ferment, that counterculture, that psychedelic things happening, the hippies, anti-war protests, the invention of the pill, sudden sexual freedom. What does it mean to be alive then? What does it mean to be alive in the 70s and 80s in Bollywood, 80s and 90s in Hollywood? What is it like to have, what was Europe like, meeting Fellini and Audrey Hepburn and Bernardo Bertolucci? And what is that whole journey of the actor with all its ups and downs? If I can persuade you to read that and your generation to read that, then I've succeeded. And that's what I want.
Definitely, sir. So you have been very open about various controversies. So I would like to ask, was Pooja Bedi aware of these things before, or there was it came to a surprise to her as well? If yes, how did she react it?
Well, she's reacted very well. Because she knew a lot of the truth from her mother's point of view. I think some things she re-understood from my point of view, but many of the facts in the book she knows, and certainly it's delighted Alaya. And Alaya is the next generation of actors in our family. And this book is written for my family as well. It's written for Alaya and Adam and Pooja and all of them to know what my story was. Even they didn't know all of my story, nor did they know, many of them know the real story, extraordinary story of my parents and their transformations from being revolutionaries to becoming religious figures. There's so much they discovered in this. So I'm very gratified by the response of my immediate family. And of course, the wonderful reviews that I've got from so many great publications and appreciation of people like you and your generation.
Thank you.
I'm just hoping that people want to take the trouble to go out there and actually find out what all the fuss is about.
finally you have actually, we can say you have actually put your point in front of everyone about Parveen Babi and the controversies and her mental state at that time. So how difficult or easy was it for you to actually write that down? Because you know that you can be easily misunderstood, you know. So
Yeah.
how was it for you?
In telling it like it was, I have left the judgment to the reader. I'm saying, yes, a lot was written. This is what actually happened. This is how I saw it. These are the facts. These are the scenes. These are the emotional dramas. These are the complications caused. These are the upheavals. This is why we separated. Judge for yourself. It's all there. If you're interested in film history, Parveen Babi, Kabir Bedi, and their relationship, read about it, decide for yourself. I'm not going to say anything more than I've said. I've told my story. Now you decide.
Was there any sort of conflict in your head while you were telling this chapter particularly, or you were so clear about things?
I was very clear. I was very clear that I was going to tell it like the way it happened, the way it resonated for me. And don't forget, this relationship happened at a time of my greatest success in Europe. So there was a strange change in the dynamic, which also affected things, because she was a bigger star than I was when I went to Europe. And suddenly I was this massive star in Europe, and she was seen as my companion. And this also changed the dynamic and complicated things in a way. And then to have this, and to deal with these extreme mental issues in the middle of extraordinary success created a strange drama of its own in my life. So I had no doubts about how I wanted to tell this. And I said, tell it like it was. Let people see. I'm not, I've talked to my own faults as well. I have not been blameless either. In retrospect, would I have done anything differently? Probably. Should she have done things differently? Probably. But all those things are things that is for you to decide. If you're interested in my life, her life, Bollywood, Hollywood, stardom in Europe, mental issues, all those are themes I've explored in my book. And it's for you to discover and for you to decide. I do believe that my story will find a home one day as a film, as a series, in the right country, in the right place, in the right platform, at the right time.
Thank you so much for your time, sir. It was amazing talking to you.
And thank you so much for the appreciation you've given my book. Thank you so much, Hitesh.
Thank you, sir. Stay safe.